totally like my body leaving this world and showing up in another world.
Right. That is what
So
we're talking about when we're saying the gates.
Dime qué tú quieres, papi. ¿Quieres que lo mueva para ti? Mueve, mueve. ¿Te gusta cuando me muevo así? Así.
Related to the Stargates. Some of this.
The victor. It is a pioneer, an innovator. It took a land without a people and made it blossom at the hands of a people without a land. Israel is necessary. Israel is a haven. It is moral. It is a democracy. Israel is America. Israel occupies, no pun intended, a unique position in the American news media landscape, in its political landscape, and more than anywhere else, in the American consciousness and imagination.
So let me be clear about what I believe. I stand with Israel because of our shared values, which are so fundamental to the founding of both our nations.
Advocacy itself is not the cause of the bond between the United States and Israel. Its cause is the shared history and common values that draw America and Israel together.
There is an assumption
That's
of
really
virtue,
revealing
of
what
a
he
greater
said.
good in America's official history that has been consciously reproduced by Israel's advocates for a large part of the last century in an attempt to Americanize the Israeli project. And so when the curtain is pulled away to reveal the violence that upholds Israel's existence, there is an understanding from the United States of the necessity of this violence. Because Israeli violence is necessary to protect Israel from threats to its exceptional existence, just as American violence is necessary to protect the United States from threats to its exceptional existence. How Israel is covered in the US news and popular media serves to obscure the biggest thing that ties the United States and Israel together. They're both settler colonial states which have been built on the displacement and ethnic cleansing of other peoples. And so to tell the story of Israel in US news media has required for over 7 decades the disappearance of Palestinians, their history, and their right to their homeland. Because
You know, that's the reason why I always go back to the Palestinian story every time, because it's the same story of my ancestors here in the States. And I see it so clear. Like, it's like they are literally going through right now what my ancestors went through not that long ago. Like,
no, yeah, I mean it's
pretty much
exact.
still happening.
It is pretty much the exact story because, and then like I said, it's these Europeans that has gone into another land to, you know, probably based on the discovery, what they call it, the doctrine of discovery, and you know, based on people's beliefs, because those Palestinians are, you know, I don't know, like to say Christian, but like they have their own set of values. That's just because I think it's maybe even more Islamic or like traditional Christianity, like not, you know, like the original stuff. But either way, these people come in and take over these people's land based on an idea that because God has told them that this is, you know, they have rights to this land because they were chosen by he himself, and you know, now they can, you know, do as they please in this land. It's really insane.
It's insane and absurd. And that's the reason why I don't like the Bible so much, because this is what they're using. They're saying, okay, it says it in there, you know, hey, we're the tribe of Judah.
What about
And
treating your neighbor like? What about treating your neighbor like you would yourself?
and even in the Bible, it gives specific locations, and that's the reason why they chose that area and all of that stuff. And it's like, you know, this is the Holy Land. This is our Holy Land that we were dispelled
But
from for years ago. So we have rights to this land. And
all
like,
of it was a scam.
we know that y'all been here for thousands of years, but hey, it's time for us to come back.
It was a scam, bro. Like, you know what? Like, look, if the
And
Holocaust really happened, then like my whole thing is that, like, okay, before all this World War II stuff happened with Germany, this, that, whatever, like I really feel like a lot of that stuff was set up as a plan before then. That's what made them, like gave them a good reason to move into that area and, do what they are have been doing. And it's like slowly trying to get rid of the people, almost like what they've like you're saying, like what they've done here, like over the years, like the genocide that has happened right here on this land is very much like what they have done over there, except that in a different age.
And I mean, I don't want to pick on a certain group of people, but these are not all Jewish people because it's so
Well,
complicated. But
it
these people
is.
who are putting on this costume and pretending to be something that they're not, it seems like everywhere they go, it's problems. People hate them. They don't want them to be there. They want them to leave. They want them to go somewhere else. It's like they don't have no home. They're nomads. It's like the idea of the gypsies. You know how like people talk about gypsies? And I want to be careful when I talk about this, but this is something that I've looked at for a long time, and there's a connection there between these same people that wherever they go, people just don't. It's like what they say about assimilation. It's like they want to assimilate. They don't do well with others. They tend to just stick to themselves only, and they have their own customs and stuff that they have been carrying with them forever. And it's just like everybody finds them repulsive and like a problem. Like they don't want them around, and then they get kicked out of every damn country that they're in. You get what I'm saying? And I'm trying not to be offensive, but this is what it is, like,
Well,
and it's because of the behavior that people have, where they have this arrogance, they have this ego, they feel like they're better than everybody else. They feel like they don't have to be trustworthy or whatever. They don't feel like they have to, because they feel like everybody else is lesser. So the only way I'm to be able to respect you is if you're on my level, but you're not on my level, so I don't have to respect you. I can lie to you, I can fuck over you, I can cheat you, or whatever. I can do you raw in any kind of way. I can take your stuff. All of this because you're lesser than me anyway. You get what I'm saying? And that kind of attitude doesn't work anywhere.
no,
Work.
but I mean, for those who go with ill intent, and that's the biggest problem, is that's what our main government has pushed for. Like I think that because we don't really agree with that is one of the reasons why we should be having our own government here on like this land, and we can actually you know pull together more. Like we don't there's many other ways that we can get things done, but as long as we're subjects of the United States, like we can't we can't even speak on anything because we're owned. Like, well, I'm not me, but like the average person, like, is still owned by the government. You're civil property, and you trying to fight against something, like they just take your ass to jail. You don't have human rights. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't really say anything. So I mean, we just got to get smarter about how we do move, and that way we can actually start to make a change somewhere. But I mean, if we keep looking and just pointing the finger, because I mean, this, like, people around the world is suffering because of what our tax dollars allows.
Let me play some more of this.
Cultural narrative about Israel where Palestinians and their history are front and center would also then require that we are honest about the violence that belies every part of the myth of American exceptionalism. Welcome to Backspace, where we tell you how the story is told in the headlines, and then we think about how we can tell it a little differently. A Jewish state, Israel was established as a state. In the 7 decades since Israel was established as a state in the British Mandate of Palestine, American engagement, ideological, political, cultural, with the Jewish state has seen different iterations. But at its core, these iterations have relied on being a mirror of the American nation. And in that mirroring, Israel has been assigned a duality as both the victim and victor. Israel is a victor, emerging from one of the cruelest crimes of the 20th century as a successful, unified people who have built a formidable nation despite thousands of years in a persecuted diaspora.
Modern Israel was born in the aftermath of the tragedy of the Holocaust. It was created to fulfill the long-standing dream of the Jewish people to return to the home of their biblical origins.
Israel is a beacon of democracy in a sea of violence and hostility.
Israel is the most important technology force in the world next to the United States.
Israel is a victim, surrounded by enemies who want to drive it into the sea.
Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel is surrounded by countries and entities that want to drive them into the sea.
Tensions are rising after the deadliest wave of Palestinian terror attacks inside Israel in years.
It has the right to eliminate the cancer that is threatening its very existence.
There are many reasons why the U.S. has this distinctive relationship with Israel, but I think the one that is most important is actually cultural. That is, we have a long history of representing Israel as being tied to U.S. interests, but also to U.S. values, to religious values and democratic values. Those representations have shaped most of us in one way or another to think of Israel as more than just a strategic ally or a good military partner.
For a cultural history that extols shared values, it must build those shared values in opposition to other ideas, other values, and in the case of state and nationalist identities, other people. U.S. news and popular media have built a case for Israel reliant on the disappearance of Palestinians and any claim they have to their land, on the disappearance of their history of ethnic cleansing, the theft of their lands, and their ever-expanding diaspora.
It's a time of... It sounds so familiar to me every time they say these words. It's like erasing their history, erasing any kind of connection to their land or rights to their land, you know, exterminating them, genociding them, you know. That's all sounds very familiar.
Of border trouble for Israel, and another incident on the Jordanian frontier results in a roundup of Arab infiltrators. Action that follows an attempt by these illegal entrants into the country to terrorize the Israeli populace living near this troubled line.
So then that's the other thing. Oh, they're immigrants. They're illegal immigrants. What the hell? Where did y'all come from? Aren't y'all new here? Like, that's why I ask people, where are your grandparents from? Oh, from somewhere else? Not from this land, huh? So then you talking about immigrants. You're a damn immigrant. What immigrants are you talking about? This and the news is always talking about here in the States, all these damn illegal immigrants. What do you the Aboriginal people are like, what the are you talking about?
The militant Arabs claimed a territorial
Same
right
people
to...
that live there and has been there for thousands of years are the illegal immigrants. Not you that just came here. You're not the. It's so crazy.
But that's the same thing with black people here in America. You're more of an illegal immigrant than the ones who actually cross. Like, they at least have a true statehood. You know what I'm saying? Like, they got somewhere else they can go. Like, they claim that you don't have a home. Really?
Palestine that was 1,000 years old. But the determined leaders of Zionism pleaded a right that was even older.
4 Israeli settlers gunned down yesterday in the West Bank by Hamas, the Palestinian faction which opposes peace talks.
To return to Palestine would be to displace Israel.
We want to think about how Palestinians are not just entirely invisible, but made visible in a particular way, which is either as terrorists or as victims. If we think about the comparison between the United States as a settler colonial state and Israel as one, we can think about how people in the U.S. presented Native Americans. They were presented as disappearing, as not having political claims. Often people were very sad about what had happened to them, but what to do? Palestinians are not seen for a long time, but when they are seen, starting in the 1980s more, they begin to be seen as people who might have political claims, but the story of them is a story of people who are victims, who have a sad story, but Israel had to be Israel.
A counter narrative to the American story about Israel that would be told from the Palestinian vantage point would also indict the sustained American histories and realities of violence against its indigenous and Black populations. Thus, Palestinians must be made into, at best, pitiful victims caught as collateral in Israel's attempt to defend itself, and at worst, as generation after generation of terrorist threats.
It doesn't really matter what the Palestinians do.
What did they say about the so-called Indians? They were always raiding villages and terrorizing the freaking locals. But they don't tell the story that them locals had just posted up their house right in the backyard of these Aboriginal peoples that have been living there for thousands of years. Like, you just parked your
That's the part that they don't
built your fence in my backyard. Like, that's not cool. I'm not cool with that. Oh, they're terrorizing us. Oh my God. Why are they doing this? Because why are you here? What are you doing? You are violating my space. Fucking crazy.
They can blow up whomever they want to blow up. They can elect Hamas when given an opportunity to move forward. They can take one chance after another to recognize the state of Israel and their right to exist, and they will not do it.
Well, last few times that negotiations have taken place, the emphasis has been on asserting that Israel has been victimized by terrorist activities, by Hamas, by the failure of the Palestinians to govern themselves.
In both and that's the other one they say, failure to govern themselves. They couldn't, we got to do it for them. I mean, they're not civilized. They're basically animals. They can't govern themselves. So we had to come in and do it for them. We're actually helping them out by colonizing here and taking their land and making them civilized and giving them language and work to do. What was they doing before we got here? Shit, they wasn't doing shit. We just gave them something to do. If you don't work, you don't eat.
Representations of Palestinians, the purpose of the state of Israel, the political status quo, and its carefully curated image remain intact. Even when Israeli crimes and transgressions beyond the expanding occupation, land theft, and apartheid are clear, Israel's moral authority isn't questioned. Questioning that moral authority is akin to questioning the necessity of Israel. So how did we get to this point where deference to Israel's moral power is reflexive and unquestioned, a privilege not enjoyed by other countries and nations? It's too reductive to think that a pro-Israel lobby is alone in building Israel in the American landscape, that they alone have had this power. It's also not enough to look at U.S. foreign policy interests in the region as the sole determinant of Israel's narrative power in U.S. news and popular media.
That makes
Both
sense.
those things are central, of course, but what brings it all together is the cultural history of Israel in the United States, how Israel was understood by Americans in the aftermath of the Second World War, and how much of that has been a mirroring of how the United States sees itself. There's a tendency to believe that the horrors of the Holocaust are what led to American support and sympathy for the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. But the late Dr. Amy Kaplan, in her 2018 book, Our American Israel, makes the argument that for Israel to be embraced by Americans, the idea of Israel had to be Americanized. She writes, Israel's proponents attributed New World meanings, symbols, and mythologies to a European movement to establish a Jewish polity in the Arab Middle East. They drew parallels between Mayflower pilgrims and Jewish pioneers in the familiar landscape of the biblical Promised Land, and they presented Zionist settlement as enacting American ideas of modern development.
In 1948, David Ben-Gurion, the George Washington of Israel, led his people and his country to independence.
And this mirroring, according to Kaplan, wasn't hard to do, especially when both shared a belief in their exceptionalism as signified by how they celebrated their anti-colonial origins, struggling against the British Empire and distancing themselves from the violent conquest at the center of their founding. Just as indigenous peoples are erased from the founding of an America free from British colonizers, Palestinians are mostly disappeared in Israel's founding.
At the founding of the Israeli state, there was almost no recognition of Palestinians at all. Even the word Palestinian was often used to refer to Palestinian Jews, people who had moved there. Palestinian Arabs were all but invisible. They were talked about only as refugees. The idea that they even represented a national consciousness was nowhere to be seen. So it was the Israelis who had the narrative of decolonization and nationalism behind them.
They were refugees. That is so crazy, and it makes me so angry. How the hell are they a refugee? You just came here. I've been here for thousands of years. How am I a refugee? I've been here forever. Ugh.
While some major news media, like the New York Times, were vehemently anti-Zionist, the narrative of decolonization and nationalism was embraced by many non-Jewish American liberals and progressives. They saw a Jewish state as the perfect rebuke to Nazi fascism, paralleling the official narrative of the US's defeat of Nazi Germany. They also saw Israel as an actualization of socialist ideals, especially with the establishment of kibbutzim and the Soviet Union's initial support for Israel. The Nation, a left-leaning magazine, was home to some of the biggest and most active support of Israel, and helped create the blueprint for how the narrative of Israel will come to be embraced in the United States news media for the coming decades, even if the Nation evolved its own position on Israel over time. The Jewish Agency, founded by socialist Zionists who helped organize and fund Jewish immigration to Palestine, gave the Nation a grant of $50,000 in 1947 for the purposes of, quote, conducting research and publishing articles and reports and promoting the Zionist cause among American liberals and foreign delegates to the United Nations. Emboldened by this, its longtime editor, Freda Kirchway, dedicated the pages of the Nation and its entire publishing institution to lobbying for the Zionist cause. Between 1947 and 1954, the Nation Associates, which was responsible for publishing the magazine, produced 12 widely distributed reports campaigning for the Zionist cause. Kirchway even wrote a 133-page memorandum for the UN on behalf of the Nation, making the case for Israel and tying the Arab Palestinians to the Nazis, which became a mainstay of liberal arguments against Palestinian self-determination thanks to her efforts.
So the Palestinians are Nazis. You know, they're anti-Semitic. They just don't want Israel to exist. It's like, but wait, I've been here for thousands of years, chilling, doing what we doing. You just landed on my lap. I don't know nothing about no Nazis. I don't know nothing about Germany. I don't know nothing about Hitler. I don't give a fuck about that dude or none of that shit. But I'm a damn Nazi. I'm anti-Semite because I don't want you to camp in my backyard. Because I don't want you to live in my house.
She ultimately even took credit for pushing the Truman administration into recognizing the State of Israel.
The Jews organized a government over there, and it's been a successful one ever since.
Now, Kirchway is just one of several examples of American media liberals and progressives who worked diligently and successfully alongside Zionist groups and leaders to make Israel into a liberal project and ideal that looked like the United States. And for every sentence dedicated to what a beacon and necessity Israel was as a pioneering nation of the so-called New Jew, there were many more dedicated to trumpeting the barbarity, jealousy, and backwardness of Arabs and Muslims. This early period of creating myths.
Same thing they said about the Indians or Native Americans, Aboriginal Americans. They're backward.
Around Israel isn't the only critical era in the cultural history of Israel in the United States, but it is the bedrock of how Israel comes to be essentially Americanized in the eyes of the public. This is the time where there is buy-in from Americans from all different backgrounds that, yeah, maybe Israel is necessary. Maybe Israel is good. And following this period, we see tourism to the land of the Bible, which had existed well before Israel's establishment, flourish throughout the 50s and 60s, as do epic biblical films and the relationship between Hollywood and Israel itself. The 60s in particular are bookended by two critical moments that guaranteed Israel's positioning in both an American consensus about its necessity and goodness and in the US's foreign policy future. The release of the 1960 film Exodus, which was supported by the Israeli government and based on the novel by Leon Uris, and Israel's quick victory over its neighbors in the war of June 1967.
I think the book Exodus resonated differently for different audiences. I think for non-Jewish people, the book, but especially the movie, tells the story of Israel in an American register. It tells the story of Israel as the settling of a frontier. 1967 is an incredible turning point in Americans' views of Israel. Almost every newspaper or magazine has some joke or comment about how maybe we need to bring Moshe Dayan over to end the Vietnam War. Israel takes on this new vision or new version of a myth in the U.S. as an invincible and admired military power. So that image that emerges after 1967, that the U.S. should be both with Israel and like Israel in terms of foreign policy, I think is one of the structuring realities to this day in how many people think about Israel.
Palestinians during these years more or less disappear from having any claim, only significantly reappearing as so-called terrorists with high-profile acts of violence, like the 1972 Munich massacre of 11 Israeli coaches and athletes, and then as victims in 1982, with the Israeli-backed massacre of Palestinian refugees in the Sabra and Shatila camps of Lebanon. And in Our American Israel, Dr. Amy Kaplan also, and most emphatically, notes that while we saw decades of Israel being Americanized for an American audience, following 9/11, we see an Israelization of the United States. We see
I want to kind of go back a bit because earlier she was talking about those movies, and Dave Chappelle in his monologue mentioned them having a lot of people. He said he went to Hollywood and there's a lot of Jewish people there, is what he said. And it's like, okay, so it's the propaganda machine for Israel is Hollywood, and you know the awesome image that we have of them is related to a lot of these big blockbuster movies that they have curated for their audience to make sure that it leads to people being sympathetic to them. You know.
Shift from the long-held, quote, admiration of Israel as a mirror of America's idealized self-image to emulation of Israel as a model for fighting America's worst nightmares.
It may take a century, 2 centuries, 3 centuries, but we will exterminate you.
Damn.
Now, while there have been moments of sympathetic visibility of Palestinians in U.S. news media, there hasn't been a staking of the legitimacy of Palestinian claims. Israel, as it exists, always requires that its legitimacy, existence, and moral authority be upheld. So a Palestinian narrative about the Nakba, about apartheid, about the refugees and land theft hasn't even been allowed to be written in American cultural history. And that's been for many reasons, like Israel as an arm of American empire, anti-Muslim and Arab sentiments as fundamental to Israel's case for legitimacy, evangelical eschatology that's anti-Semitic, and of course the fact that the majority of American Jews fall into the category of whiteness. So how can journalists in U.S. news media engage with Israel and its role in U.S. history in a way that is honest and adheres to the basic principles of journalism?
So that's the basic undercurrent. It's whiteness. You know, they get to be accepted into this all-encompassing view of, you know, light-skinned Europeans, if you will. You know, they have more legitimacy, you know, to this land that is mostly brown people, brown and black people, you know, but they're Arab or they're, you know, they're lesser, so they don't have rights, you know. So And that is the camaraderie. That is the basic, thing that holds Israel and United States together.
Like punching up and never down. Well, it involves a lot of reimagining of how we've embraced Israel and disappeared Palestinians for 7 decades, based on whose humanity we've determined is worth more because of how it looks like ours.
I think there is a question of why it has been so hard for Americans to imagine that Palestinians have an absolute right to self-determination, that Palestinians, as much as anybody else, has the right to represent themselves, to have some kind of sovereign control over their lives. It is a bit shocking to me that it's been so hard for Americans to understand that. But I think it's a combination of Islamophobia, even though many Palestinians are Christian, many are Muslim, and that Islamophobia gets in the way.
In the pilot episode of Backspace back in May 2021, we broke down the sort of language that contemporary news media uses in coverage of Israeli occupation and apartheid, language that obfuscates not only the daily crimes committed by the Israeli state, but also the realities that Palestinians have experienced since 1948. But language is easier to revisit and rectify than an entire moral framework built on not only shared values, but ideations about a shared so-called Judeo-Christian heritage, about shared myths of revolution, about shared pioneering and shared exceptionalism. Good journalism about Israel that does what it's supposed to do doesn't separate Israel from its position as an occupying state and from its origins as a European settler colonial project born out of a European movement led by European Jews. Good journalism about Israel doesn't ignore what sustains Israel's existence as it is: the apartheid, Gaza as an open-air prison, the ever-expanding settlements, the checkpoints, the land theft, the incarcerations and killings of Palestinian youth, in addition to so much else that is meant to ensure that Palestinians never can have self-determination. Good journalism doesn't ignore Palestinians and doesn't question or belittle their claims to nationhood, resistance, and return when it does offer them some semblance of humanity and coverage. But for that kind of good journalism to happen, it needs to untangle and deconstruct the myths that tie together Israeli and American exceptionalisms. Otherwise, our journalism guarantees that those myths, which are used to justify the cruelties that sustain both Israel and the United States, are strengthened.
Freaking journalism. We don't have any journalism. Journalism is dead. Let me read some more comments. It says, this is a comment underneath the video. It says, I love how everything you say makes common sense. Another comment, it says, they want to talk about topics. Hold on. They're still saying topics. Another one, I appreciate your work. Embrace the truth. Raise the voice for oppressing Palestinians. Inshallah, Allah will give you and your team its reward in this life and hereafter, and Palestinians will get freedom from Israel occupation. Hopefully, but right now it doesn't look like that. So with my lights. Thank you, God, for this day we have lived, everything in our life, our health, our family, the guidance you have given us, allow us guidance to the path of righteousness. Amen.
Really, I'ma get that bitch. Revenge is a dish best served cold. She took my son, now my soul is cold. He took